Hi there, good to be back. Get me right, your deep dive show on what matters to you, what concerns you. From your state government raising fuel prices to the impact of elections in the European Union on India's geopolitical positioning. From supply chain disruptions due to the war in Europe to national security consequences for India of increasing Chinese belligerence in the Indo-Pacific, or even the water crisis in the national capital. If there's a story which matters to you, come here every weekend for insights that complete the picture with the right perspective. Get me right. This week, I bring to you two stories that panned out over the broad news canvas past week. You might have picked up bits and pieces of them here and there, but they are important enough for a big picture lowdown. First up is the impact of populist measures announced during campaign rhetoric by political parties on the finances of some state governments, and how those impact not just your pockets in the present, but add to the debt you have to pay in future. Second is about resurgence of the right wing across Europe and Americas. We will understand why it's happening and what are going to be its consequences for us in India. Let me get you the first one. I was alarmed personally hearing a soundbite on the desk this week. Himachal Pradesh Chief Minister Sukhwinder Singh Sukhu warned of cutting down forests in his jurisdiction to raise revenue unless the centre compensated the state for the in-shambles finances. Sukhu was honest in that he said the forests, 88% of the land area of Himachal, act as a huge lung space for North India and would be detrimental to environmental health if lost to revenue deficit.
अगर हम जंगल काटने की परमिशन देते हैं तो हम अपनी आय को बढ़ा सकते हैं, लेकिन उस संदर्भ में भी हमें उपेक्षा होती है। हमने पूरी तरह जंगलों पर 68% हमारी फॉरेस्ट लैंड है, उस पर बैन लगा रखा है।
Sukhu led the Congress to power in the state last year on the back of promises ranging from restoration of the old pension scheme to cash tolls of rupees 1,500 per month to all women. For the limited rollout of the OPS, the Himachal government increased VAT on diesel by rupees 3 per litre. The women's cash dole scheme is yet to see the light of day, for which it seems Sukhu has threatened a forest burn.
हजारों करोड़ रुपए हम कर्नाटक की जनता को और किसानों को वापस देने जा रहे हैं। 2,000 रुपए मिलेगा आपको। हमारा एक और स्कीम होगा जिसका नाम सखी है। तीसरा वायदा अन्नभाग्य स्कीम। चौथा वायदा गृह ज्योति युवा निधि स्कीम के माध्यम से हम 3,000 रुपए हर महीने कर्नाटक के हर ग्रेजुएट को 2 साल के लिए देंगे।
In Congress-ruled Karnataka down south, we saw back-to-back headlines of increase in fuel, electricity and milk prices last week, as also government weighing in revising water charges in urban areas, particularly Bengaluru, given those have stagnated for the last 10 years. The government has been forced to engage the Boston Consulting Group to find revenue sources, apart from seeking the centre's support package to deliver on the promises Congress made during last year's assembly elections.
There is a lot of last 10 years, the water tariff in Bangalore has not been increased. It is suffering a great loss. We have to take new projects. Okay. No bank is coming forward to finance the BWSSB.
In neighboring Kerala, the same story of revenue deficit has prompted the left government to approach the centre for fiscal indulgence by way of increased borrowings, even as the State Finance Minister K.N. Balagopal saw a direct cash package of rupees 24,000 crores during his pre-budget consultations with Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. To make promises and not be able to keep them is bad politics and bad economics, ultimately leading people down the rabbit hole, which can lead to a social stagnation not unfamiliar to India, particularly of the pre-reform generation. And remember, while NDA-ruled states like Bihar or Andhra might seek their share of union government's additional budgetary support to meet their growth ambition, those can't be compared with economically sounder states like Karnataka and Kerala. A look at RBI data of major states last fiscal shows major states that have revenue surplus include Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Gujarat, Telangana, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar and Assam. While states running revenue deficit include Karnataka, Kerala, Maharashtra, Haryana, Punjab and Rajasthan. The pattern of INDI ruled states being revenue surplus except for Telangana and INDI bloc ruled states being revenue deficit except for Maharashtra and Haryana is indicative of how the revenue math gets played out. Not to argue that BJP is above populism temptations when it comes to states. Despite Prime Minister's very public positioning of populism as reverie culture,
आजकल हमारे देश में मुफ्त की रेवड़ी बांटकर वोट बटोरने का कल्चर लाने की भरसक कोशिश हो रही है। ये रेवड़ी कल्चर देश के विकास के लिए बहुत घातक है। इस रेवड़ी कल्चर से देश के लोगों को और खास करके मेरे युवाओं को बहुत सावधान रहने की जरूरत है।
we have seen BJP too giving in to the pressures of competitive campaigns on fiscally unsustainable welfareism.
अभी तक 23 साल या उससे ज्यादा की उम्र की जो बहनें शादीशुदा होती थी उनको योजना का लाभ मिलता था, लेकिन कन्यादान योजना में कई बेटियों की शादी 21 साल में ही हो गई। तो अब 21 साल की बेटी भी जो है उनको भी लाडली बहना योजना का लाभ दिया जाएगा।
But if one looks at the picture from the New Delhi vantage, Modi gets a thumbs up on fiscal management that is classical conservatism.
In the past, if you look at, and even in the times when I was worked with the government, this government has met its fiscal targets diligently. So there's absolutely no question of the fiscal target being missed. I don't know who was talking about it. I think there was no question about it.
But for the COVID slip, not only has the Modi government stuck to fiscal consolidation roadmap under the FRBM Act targets, but it has also attained a level of finesse in targeted social welfare distribution through the digital public infrastructure created on the Aadhaar backbone. There are studies to show that the digital governance has eliminated middleman-driven corruption, better targeted beneficiaries from deprived sections, and plugged leakages that add to fiscal health of the government. In a way, it's an old yet recurrent debate every election cycle, that of welfare versus populism. State welfareism, or the philosophy of the state taking care of its citizens, if not fully, then in good measure, is as old as the conception of the idea of state itself. From Ram Raj in Indian epics to Kautilya's Arthashastra to Ashoka's Dhamma, India has had a civilizational understanding of a welfare state. In the Western world, of course, all ideas lead to Rome. There are records that show the Roman plebeian council approving distribution of free grain in the 2nd century before Christ. By 3rd century of the Common Era, or after Christ, the grains were replaced by bread, each subsequent emperor adding his own bit of individualism that saw stuff like olive oil, wine, and pork getting added to the welfare doles. One Roman emperor is said to have started free entertainment events called Ludi, which were part financed by the public exchequer with personal funds of presiding officials embellishing the splendor quotient. Though there were no elections to be won, the masses had to be kept happy. Like when the DMK in Tamil Nadu promised color television sets back in 2006, calling them a necessity at par with roti, kapda and makan. Ultimately, there's nothing called a free lunch. For every free bus ride women in Karnataka are getting, it's likely someone in the family is spending more than the ticket price in the fuel burn post the price hike. India's social sector spending stands at roughly 10% of the GDP. The figure is upwards of 25% for the developed economies of the OECD countries, which, by the way, also means that welfarism is not bad. It's even a necessity, perhaps, for low per capita income country like India to sustain basic minimum quality of life for its masses. But the ludi should not cross over into the ludicrous zone, and that we have to work together, the center and the states and all the political parties, to increase the pie to be shared. The GDP that makes us middle-income country. After all, a rising tide raises all boats, as they say.
In the global employability rankings by Times Higher Education UK, only the following 6 institutions from India are ranked amongst the top 230 in the world for having the most employable graduates. IIT Delhi, IISc Bangalore, IIT Bombay, IIM Ahmedabad, IIT Kharagpur and Amity University.
Get ready to witness the best technology extravaganza of the year. The first edition of the Republic Business Emerging Technology Awards has received an overwhelming number of nominations. Dominating the categories are AI and robotics, healthcare, edutech, fintech, banking and finance, and martech.
All right, let's move on to the second focus this week. On Monday, President Emmanuel Macron told in a podcast interview that the danger of a civil war was real in France.
As the head of the army, as head of security, I will be determined and I will fight in every way against Islamist terror. What they expect, the trap, is the trap you are going to fall into, civil war.
In fact, as we speak, the French are going through a snap poll for their legislature ordered by Macron following a defeat his Renaissance party faced in the European Parliament elections a fortnight ago. Far-right national rally of Marine Le Pen won double the vote share of Macron's party, prompting him to seek mid-term validation from the people so that he could continue to govern. From Berlin to Rome, from Vienna to Budapest, European capitals have felt the ripples of the continent-scale shift happening in their politics. The rise of the political right is a reality with which the European establishment has come face to face. And how? There's a reason why I said establishment. For much of the post-World War II period, the mainstream establishment in the West has been left, center-left, or right of center. With the colonialism capital providing deep pockets and the Marshall Plan giving tailwinds, Europe became an economic powerhouse early in the post-war era. The rich world created for itself a welfare state that effectively took care of its citizens from the cradle to the grave. Out of the comforts of those riches came concepts like postmodernism. Broad contours of European welfarism included social protections along with social inclusions, political responsibility of livelihoods, and ironclad commitment to democracy. Much of it, frankly, because the state could afford it. They were rich, they had the money. Cushioned by the riches, the state machinery became predominantly occupied with wealth distribution. Concepts like equality and equity became pronounced in politics, leading to a sway of Marxist ideas. Liberalism became the natural creed of politics, and hence the mainstream establishment. Right was fringe, right was extreme, right was illiberal, right was shunned. In fact, so entrenched became the left that across Europe there emerged something called cordon sanitaire in French, which means a firewall, a well-organized attempt to keep the right-wing forces away, to keep them pinned as reactionary extremists, with all sorts of center-left coalitions coming together to keep them away from the levers of power. But as they say, every idea has a life cycle. a parabola that peaks, plateaus, and then comes down. While European welfarism became an ideal, even seeping into international institutions of governance like the United Nations, back in these societies, there were some deleterious consequences. The fracture of family as an institution was one. While the rise of Europe was characterized by Renaissance and Reformation era Lutheran and Protestant work ethic, the welfarism has produced wokeism, where LGBTQ plus rights and the Palestinian cause take precedence over immediate societal needs. There might be a direct correlation between the increasing wokeism in these societies and the economic woes being faced. Climate activism and its footprint on policy making has had an adverse economic fallout. For much of the last decade and a half, the European economy has been mildly recessionary. The 0.3% growth in positive territory in the first quarter of 2024 has led to a hurrah of relief. Imagine, if India grows at 7%, it's called a slow rate of growth. China is considered anemic if it falls below 5%. You get the drift. The need for hands for physical labor was another consequence of postmodernism. There's a reason why, on a short visit to any of these nations, you would find the janitors and the taxi drivers, nurses, and the subway sandwich maker belonging to non-European nationalities. A mix of colonial guilt and the need for those hands led to a liberal immigration regime in most of these societies. Wars from Afghanistan to Syria have added to the migrant rush, which became a tide over the last couple of decades. Now, Europe has a problem at hand that has become a full-blown crisis. France, for example, which had 7% of its population made up of foreign-born nationals at the turn of the century, has seen the number go up to 12.5% this year, prompting an anti-immigrant law, which Macron pushed and the French legislature passed December last year. In Germany next door, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is also facing the heat. The far-right AfD has made a big jump, becoming the second largest party after the Social Democrats. Not unsurprisingly, Germany's Greens were the biggest losers in the European polls, punished by voters for the cost of policies to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Job loss to the migrants and restrictive climate policies, clashes rooted in cultural differences, unending waves of illegals stretching public infrastructure, prohibitive living costs, unaffordable housing, have all come together and created a political situation where even working classes in Europe find the left-of-center zeitgeist less attractive than earlier. Let's look at just one of the fallouts of the migrant issue: crime. As I run these graphics on your screen, you would get an idea of the scale of the crisis. The rise of the right must be seen in this backdrop. Geert Wilders heralded the shift late last year in the Netherlands. Giorgia Meloni in Italy and Viktor Orban in Hungary have been holding forth for a while. In fact, already influencing policy making at the European level through the presence of their party MEPs, or members of the European Parliament, in the continental body. Marine Le Pen called June results return of the nations. Wilders' Party for Freedom is the fourth far-right party to gain power in an EU state in recent years, following Hungary and Italy. Going by the European Parliament elections results, Austria, France, and Germany might follow the trend, with the far-right Freedom Party, the National Rally, and the Alternative for Germany polling higher than the current governments. There's already a domino. In Canada this week, the Conservatives wrested Toronto riding seat in a by-poll from Trudeau's Liberals, the seat shifting to right after a long time. Across the Niagara Falls, momentum is already building up for a Trump comeback. To be sure, the EU vote has not given control over to the far right. The centrist coalition still holds majority under Ursula von der Leyen. but the shift is clearly towards forces that are seen to be representing the angst on the ground against immigration, economic woes, and social fracture. Now let's understand what are going to be the consequences of this on Europe, on the rest of the world, and for us in India. For Europe, there would be visible recalibration of policy making on environment, immigration, on what still constitute the mainstream parties. There could be clear consequences for the Ukraine war. Remember, the far right is traditionally Eurosceptic and hence less anti-Russian. They don't see the Russia-Ukraine war as of their making, and to that extent would influence Europe's overall support to Ukraine going forward. If you add to it the possibility of a Trump comeback across the Atlantic, then we are looking at some difficult times for Zelensky. Hungary and Poland have built border fences. It's become a France versus UK issue as well, with the likes of Nigel Farage saying stop funding France till it stops the boats. UK's Rwanda plan has been symptomatic of the scale of the problem. Europe has never been as closed as this before. It's still not a tipping point in terms of an existential crisis for the European Union. It survived Brexit, but there's a message from a restless EU citizenry that issues of migration and economic mess are real and need addressed. For India, well, we shifted right decisively in 2014. Despite the June 4 blip, Prime Minister Narendra Modi remains firmly in control. The melody memes from the G7 summit earlier this month have not died down. Geert Wilders took very pro-India positions even before he crashed into the headlines last year in the Netherlands. With China in a Gramscian war of position with the West, the realignments towards right in the Euro-Atlantic world add to the already building synergy on both economic and political fronts between India and the West. Good for us. Thanks for watching.